This is Dennis McMahon, and welcome to Positively Vermont. Today we're going to be speaking about the new laws and the new concerns about handheld devices and driving in the state of Vermont. And we have with us Lieutenant Garry Scott, Supervisor of the State Police Traffic Safety Unit, and Glen Button, the Director of Enforcement and Safety for the Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles. Welcome to Positively Vermont.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. I just want to say that this is the typical handheld device, and I have trouble walking with this device. Not only that, I have trouble even if I'm sitting down in a meeting and something comes up and I want to read an email or I have to respond to someone, I am distracted and I don't hear what the other person or the speaker particularly is saying. So even as a pedestrian, I find this a bit of a distraction. But now this is one of the coming things in the state. I know that State Senator Dick Mazza was someone who was talking about it for years, and eventually his committee in the state legislature helped enact this law, and today we're going to discuss the law, how it affects you, and also some other tips about traffic safety here in Vermont. But first of all, gentlemen, why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself. Glenn?
Sure. As much as I hate to admit it, I've been in law enforcement for 40 years. I started out as a Burlington police officer. I worked in this fine city for 25 years. I attained the rank of Deputy Police Chief in charge of police operations. And I retired from the city and had an opportunity to go to work for the Department of Motor Vehicles. And in my current role, I'm the Director of Enforcement and Safety, and we have about 50 full-time staff and around 50 seasonal staff, and we do a lot of different things. Commercial vehicle enforcement is one of our main responsibilities. We have staff that run all the weigh stations that you'll see. We oversee all of the licensed inspection stations, dealerships, school bus issues, private driver education schools, and so forth. And I also currently serve as chair of the Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council, and that's the governing board of the Police Academy.
Excellent. Lieutenant?
So I've been with the state police for 14 years. I've worked almost all of my career in the Chittenden and Lamoille County area, and I was a DUI trooper. I was one of the first DRE troopers, which is a drug recognition expert in the state. Within my role of traffic safety, I've been a sergeant in traffic safety, and then I oversee our crash reconstruction program. Now as the lieutenant of the traffic safety for the entire state police. So anything traffic safety for the state police issues usually lands in my office.
Excellent. Well, this is a big topic right now here in Vermont, and why don't you begin by telling us how it all happened, how we now have this law, which we'll discuss. Vermont's new handheld device law. Tell us a little bit of background, and then we'll get into the law itself.
Sure. If you look historically, in 2009, the legislature enacted a law on that prohibited texting while driving, and at about the same time, they also put restrictions on junior operators. Those are people that are under 18 years old, and the restriction on the junior operators was that they couldn't use any portable electronic device while driving, and that included hands-free telephones as well. In January of this year, January 1st, a new law took effect that prohibits using a portable handheld electronic device while going through a work zone. Now, this past legislative session, I think one of the real champions of this was Senator Mazza from Colchester Grand Isle, and what he was hearing from the law enforcement community was it was really, really difficult to enforce the texting law. For example, a police officer would see someone and they'd have a device in their hand while they were driving and they're hitting the buttons. Are they texting or are they dialing a telephone number? And I think Senator Mazza understood that concern, and his feeling was if you're going to have a law, you need to have a law that you can enforce. So he was a champion and a big supporter of the law that took effect on October 1st.
What exactly has been happening since October 1st out there?
So, I mean, I think we've seen compliance, and we're hoping that people we've had an extended period of time to get the message out there. So myself and Glenn and many others have been anywhere and everywhere trying to get the word out. And so there's been plenty of warning that they pushed it. Most laws go into effect on July 1st. We pushed this back to October 1st to have an extended period. So now I think obviously people have been stopped. It's an adjustment for law enforcement and the public. So we're in this phase where hopefully it's an educational portion where people realize there's a new law out there, and we can all kind of work on this together. It's not just an enforcement thing; it's a community thing. People need to have responsibility of their driving.
Former U.S. Secretary of Transportation Ray LaHood described distracted driving as an epidemic, and I think he was absolutely right. If you look at the number of fatals, in 2012 there were 33,561 people killed on the highways of this nation, and they estimate that 10% of those crashes were caused by some type of distraction. And in today's society, we all like to multitask. We like to do a lot of different things at one time. And as I've said before, I think with cell phones, they actually become an appendage. Mm-hmm. People have them all the time. We can all tell stories of, you see somebody walking down the street, they're in the grocery store, they're doing all of these things. And I think what we would like to do, our partners in law enforcement and in the private sector, is to get the word out to people that driving is serious business. And when you're driving a car, your focus should be on driving safely. And you really need to minimize distractions, and we think that this law will have a positive effect. We're hoping that it will cause people to really look at their driving habits, to really assess, what am I doing now that I shouldn't be doing? A car is not a mobile phone booth. It really isn't. And people need to focus on that primary responsibility of driving safely.
And on top of that, cell phones, when they were introduced in the early 90s, they were used to save lives. So we were able to increase our response times to get to these crashes much quicker. And now we've come full circle, while now they're actually causing deaths on our roadways. So we really have to take a look at ourselves internally and what we're doing out there. And driving is, as Glenn just said, is serious business. You don't want to be the person that has to live with it for the rest of life because you were looking at Facebook and then you hit someone. So it's not worth it, and the consequences can be very severe.
From a highway safety standpoint, in my time in law enforcement, there's been a lot of very, very positive things happen. If you look at cars now, they're manufactured better, with airbags and lane departure warnings and so forth. I think highways certainly are made better. They're safer. They have the center line rumble stripes that are a great alert for people. Emergency response. If there is a crash and rescue responds, those people are really well trained. They have good equipment, and they do a great job. From an enforcement standpoint, I think that our officers are better skilled now. Their skills are more sophisticated, and I think there are laws on the books now that help police do their job better. And this is an example of that. In the state of Vermont, right now, there have been 32 people killed in crashes on our highway. And we can talk about numbers, 32 is a number. Well, those are people, and those are 32 families that have had a tragedy and 32 losses. So we all have to do whatever we can to enhance highway safety and really go toward the national goal of attaining 0 deaths.
And this law isn't going to capture everything. We recognize there's still behavior out there that is distraction that's not just a cell phone, such as people putting on makeup, reading textbooks, eating their food, and so it comes down, again, this is just one step in the right direction, we hope.
I have heard some stories about what people do, and I've seen it. The one thing I managed to see is that every near miss that I've seen with myself crossing the street, invariably someone has a cell phone. Every near miss that I might have had crossing the street, I might have been on a cell phone. And I was talking to some people yesterday in anticipation of the show, and the things some people do in their car, I was like there was a Homer Simpson episode where he basically had his refrigerator, his breakfast, and everything else, and phones and television while driving. And it's not too far off.
Right.
And I think we could all tell horror stories of unsafe driving actions that we've seen. But when there are laws and people are aware of laws, the majority of people are going to follow the law. And that's what we hope happens in this case. Quite frankly, in the ideal, I hope we don't have to issue any tickets. You know, there'll be some people that, for whatever reason, won't abide by the law, but I think the majority of people are going to abide by the law. And from a penalty standpoint, you know, it's not inexpensive. If you were apprehended for a first offense, it's a $162 fine. If you get apprehended for a second or subsequent offense within a 2-year period, the fine goes up to $392. And with this infraction, there's no points assessed. But if you look at texting or driving through a work zone, you would get points. So it's not an inexpensive traffic violation. So, you know, that's something people should be mindful also.
Well, I think family members sometimes can help. I know that children often will remind their parents, you know, put on a seatbelt because they've seen these types of things in school or on television and PSAs, stuff like this about warning. But well, how should someone begin their journey here? Let's say I'm walking along, I've got my cell phone, I'm talking to the office or whatever, or I have a meeting coming up, I have to meet some guy. And what will happen, maybe I'll put it in the pocket, and sometimes these devices are very hard to shut off. Could you carry us through a little bit of recommended journey for somebody?
Well, I think like anything, when we talk about is having a plan before you even get in the vehicle. So if you know you're going to be driving, you make the phone calls beforehand, or you have the devices that are going to allow you to do that. So, you know, Bluetooth in the car works well, but if you have a plan beforehand, you make the phone call, then you get behind the wheel, and then you drive on and do what you need to do. And that's the same with impairment. If you know you're going out at night to have a few drinks, is to have a plan. You don't want to put yourself in that position where now you can't get home or you think you should drive. If you're not sure, you shouldn't be doing it, and that's what we want. It's just if you come up with a plan beforehand, you can work through these situations, and it won't catch you off guard. But make the calls either at the beginning or the end of your trip, and focus on driving the whole way. That's the safe way we can go about that.
And I think Gary's absolutely right. And you know, one of the things we would ask people to ask themselves is, how critical is it that I make that call? You know, how critical is it that I take that call? Can I wait till I get to my destination? Is there a safe part of the road that I can pull off and you know, stop my vehicle and make the call? So those are questions drivers should ask themselves. And
what about some of these devices now that we see? I was in a car yesterday where the cell phone is built in, and you can talk. Now that's okay under the new law. You know, like you have a cell phone going on, but you're still driving, and there's it picks it up. You don't hold it in your hand. Does this just cover handheld devices or anything else it covers?
So the law right now is you can't have anything in your hand for an electronic device. So if it's in your hand, you'll be in violation and you're subject to being stopped for the investigation. So if the device is on the seat next to you, in the cup holder, or preferably in a secured mount that you can easily activate and deactivate it, that's the way the law kind of plays out right there. So, but those Bluetooth devices, my wife has a new car, it has it right in the car, and as soon as you get into the car, it recognizes the phone is there, and it's all voice activated. I can say, call home, and it immediately does that and calls without having to touch anything, and I can end the call that way too. So that's a great advancement for us. But I mean, if you don't have the capability to pay for that, is having a mount where you can just touch it and, you know, have the one touch to activate the phone call.
I suppose the legislature, Dick Miles' bill, they did some research here, and maybe you could talk about the human response to this, or some of the ergonomics about driving and this type of distraction.
Yeah, actually, Vermont became the 15th state in the country to enact a law like this. 44 states have laws that prohibit texting, and there's a lot of research out there. And you know, if you look at the Governor's Highway Safety Administration, and it talks about distractions in general, but it talks about you know, the use of a handheld cell phone. And what the Governor's Highway Safety Association would say is their preference is you don't engage in any, you know, type of cell phone conversation, be it hands-free or handheld. But they certainly support, you know, the laws that ban the handheld devices. And from my own experience, it's different. It really is different as compared to having a conversation with someone that's a passenger in your car. You know, when you have that phone up to your ear or whatever, when you're, you know, even with a hands-free device, that conversation is different. So there's a lot of different studies out there that have come into play on this. But we would go back to the challenge to drivers to just really look at your driving practices and ask the question, how critical is it that I'm engaged in this distraction period?
There's three parts really to this whole thing. There's the visual part of your driving, looking down the road, the manual part where you're holding onto the steering wheel, and the cognitive part to think about what you need to do. And when you take your eyes off the road, now your hand is off the wheel, and now you're thinking about something else. You've all three parts that you need to drive safely are now being diverted to something else, and especially if it's in your hand and you got to start dialing a number with it or moving around and looking to find it. Depending upon your speed, you can travel the length of a football field in about 4 or 5 seconds, and that's how long it takes to find those numbers in there. So all three parts of what it takes to be a good driver have now been diverted to something else. And if you're going 65 miles an hour on the interstate, it's going to take you almost 600 feet to come to a complete stop.
I've noticed some people, like, not since October 1, but like they'll make a maneuver if they go to the side of the road because they want to make a call, which I suppose is fine, or answer the call, but that's another indication of not paying attention to what's going on. Just because of the phone, they'll just maybe go off onto the road into the woods.
And Dennis, you make a great point about people pulling over to the side of the road, and one of the questions that we receive quite often, can I pull onto the breakdown lane of the interstate and make a call? And you can't, unless it's a bona fide emergency. You can't be stopping on the breakdown lane. Certainly you can go to a rest area. If you're on a state highway, a city street or whatever, you can pull to the side as long as it's not a prohibited area to make the call. But that is a question we get quite often. Can I just pull over on the side of the interstate and make my call? And the answer is no.
Well, before this went into effect, maybe you could describe what efforts the police made in terms of training for this. Are officers now taking special programs, or was there a training or run-up period to this where you're prepared for it?
Yeah, we're prepared for it because the law is when it gets down to it, it's pretty basic that you just can't have the device in your hand. So if it's in your hand and the officer can see it as you're driving through, that's enough for them to make the stop. So there's no bells and whistles to it. It's pretty simple. So if you see someone having an electronic device in their hand, as the vehicle has to be in motion. So if it's stopped, the person can pick it up and look at it. But if they start to move, that's what we see a lot of times, is that someone's at a stoplight, they may be the second or third car in line, they start to look at the device, traffic starts to go, the car behind them sees the green light, and then we have a minor rear-end collision. That's a very common event that happens. So we're encouraging people, just when you're driving, just put it down, don't even touch it at all if you don't have to, so that way you're paying complete attention to the roadways. But yeah, so the first part of the question is there's no magic to this. If you see someone having it in their hand while the vehicle's in motion, they're subject to being stopped.
And then now, when that stop takes place, I'm sure that there are other things that might be observed. Tell us maybe the legal nature of what happens if you're stopped for this. What can law enforcement do, or what can occur next if something else is going on?
I mean, so it's the grounds for the legal stop. They see it, so there's the reasons for that to have. It's a civil traffic violation, just like a speeding ticket or a tail light being out. The officer comes up, and then there's going to be some type of investigation that will occur during that. Much like if it was a DUI, if the person is speeding, they get stopped, or there's some type of driving behavior that occurred for the officer to make the stop, and then they come up, and if the person smells of alcohol and they've slurred speech, they're subject to being arrested for DUI. And for this, there can be an investigation there to occur, whether the person was on the phone, was it an emergency, what were they actually doing, what were they actually touching, and then the officer can issue a ticket from there, and the person has the right to dispute that ticket, saying I didn't have it in the hand, and it's going to come into court, and the traffic judge can make a decision there. But if you're stopped for it, and you have other things going on in the car, the officer's going to conduct an investigation of everything. So that has happened so far. We've seen. I think what you're talking about is we've had a drug arrest already made. Person had indicators of drugs in the car. The officer seized the car and then applied for a search warrant and was granted that, and there was an arrest made from that already within this week.
I know this might be a matter of policy, but is there a warning procedure, or is a ticket going to get issued right away?
We can't dictate policies for all the various police departments. What we are confident happens is that they'll follow their policies and they'll use good discretion and issue for clear-cut substantial violations of the law. But we have really put out a major public information campaign. We've been working on this for the last several months. You know, you've seen the signs, the variable messaging signs on the interstate. You go to several different state websites, they have the information there, Facebook. Vermont Emergency Management actually sent an email blast, over 5,000 recipients on this. We've done a lot of different media engagements, from radio to newspaper to television. So we're pretty confident that we've done a good job in getting the word out to people, so people should be aware of this law.
That's excellent. Tell us a little bit about some of the other groups that have been involved in this. We have the state police, we have the Department of Motor Vehicles, and what I've noticed in this particular case is there's a really great deal of interagency communication. And tell us about that Safety Alliance.
Sure. The Vermont Highway Safety Alliance has been active for several years, and it's a public-private partnership. We have partners from the trucking industry, car dealerships, emergency response and so forth, as well as state agencies, county agencies, and local agencies. And in the Highway Safety Alliance, we have several critical emphasis areas that we focus on, and one of them has been distracted driving. And the Highway Safety Alliance has been a huge contributor in this effort. They have a website that I think the viewers will see on the screen, and we would encourage people to go to that website. It's got a lot of great information on FAQs, and it also has a guide to different devices. If you're not sure about the Bluetooth-enabled devices, you go to this guide. It'll really walk you through what's out there, give you a sense of what the costs are. And I've got to tell you, technology is not my friend. Mm-hmm. And with my own personal vehicles, to set up the Bluetooth devices, it was a 3-minute job. It was very easy, very straightforward.
What about the handheld, what about things like iPads and the small computers and stuff?
Those fall under the law. Any type of portable electronic device,
you don't have to be speaking to somebody or texting to somebody. You could be doing some work with it.
Yeah, so having a laptop computer would fall under this law, so you'd be in violation of it.
Don't forget, Dennis, that work should be driving the car safely.
Yeah, exactly.
And I want to, yes. Some of the things that Glenn talked about with the Highway Safety Alliance is that it really does take a look at a total problem. So having a road engineer and law enforcement and EMS all sitting together at one table trying to come up with a plan to fix an intersection or a stretch of road that we've seen throughout the state. So rumble strips would be one of the things that causes some controversy here and there, but the data for rumble strips and the engineers that have come up with them and how they continue to evolve are saving lives right now. We've seen dramatic decrease in crashes. Route 4 down in the Woodstock area, where a few years ago we had 4 fatalities within a year. Since we've added the rumble strips, we've taken a look at the signage, we've had more enforcement. You know, it was a total group effort, and we've had no fatalities since we did all that work, and we've seen a dramatic reduction in crashes. So it's having everyone who has a highway safety plan sitting together and actually sharing their ideas, and then things you never even thought of. The law enforcement officer may, you know, when he shows up at a minor rear-end collision and he chooses to not write a report, well, that's hindering things on the other end, where the road engineer never gets that information and doesn't realize that intersection is really a problem. So they rely on that data, and now having a conversation and making it clear to everyone, if you do this, it's going to help us really fix this whole problem. And I think the public expects all these agencies to be working together, and that's what we're really trying to do with the group. Excellent.
Well, one of the things that we might want to touch upon now is we're entering a new season, and driving conditions change, of course, and maybe you have some tips about driving at this time of the year that you'd like to tell our viewers about.
One of the things that we encourage the viewers to do is maintenance on their vehicle. It won't be long until we'll be seeing snowflakes coming down, and they really should go to wherever they have it serviced. If they service it themselves, make sure the battery is adequate, make sure their wipers are adequate, to look at their tires. There are a lot of different tire options out there, and it really comes down to what the person's driving practices and driving needs are, to make sure that the tires are appropriate for their use, and I'm sure Gary has some stuff.
Yeah, I mean, having 4 good snow tires on a car makes a world of difference, you know, especially just putting on 2, that's going to change the traction of the vehicle. So some people try to just do that, but if the vehicle starts to move or slide a little bit, those rear tires don't have a snow tire on them, that can cause the vehicle to slide even further. One of the things we really like to talk about is on the interstate, the speed limit is set at 65 miles an hour on a beautiful day in July. it's not when it can't be 65 when it's snowing and sleet and ice on the road and there's a layer of ice on there. You got to. The law will tell you you have to reduce your speed and drive appropriately for the road conditions. And as we all know, the plows, there's a limited amount of resources out there. The roads are not always bone dry in Vermont, and there's going to be snow and ice, especially after the sides of the road. So we really want people just to really look at the road conditions, plan again accordingly to where you're going and leaving the amount of time it's going to take to get there. You know, it's not too bad in July to get to work. You can get there in 15 minutes, but come December and January, it may be a 20 to 30-minute ride. So you got to plan accordingly. And we recognize that we have kids, you have other, you got to drop the kids at school and you need groceries, but if you have that plan to get yourself there, it eliminates that stress of trying to get there. So, and then the vehicle's not going to react the same it does when the road is dry. In the snow, it's going to take longer to stop. So if you got to leave more space between you and the vehicle in front of you so you can make that stop. And that's what we see is over and over again. When the first snow flies in Vermont, on Interstate 89 and 91, we'll have 30 to 40 cars that are going to go right off the roadway. And they're subject to being ticketed for that. Mm-hmm. The responsibility, again, falls back on the driver to drive safely for the road conditions.
Yeah, and the other piece, Dennis, is make sure you clean the snow off your car before you go. You know, a lot of times people go out, they jump in a car, it's got a foot of snow on it, and they figure, well, the wind will blow it off. Well, they need to make sure that that car is clean of snow, because not only does it obstruct the driver's view, but you've got that snow blowing off. It could be blocks of ice that could be a hazard to someone else.
Yeah, and that was last year. We had an ice storm early in the year in December, and that became a very real issue, the ice coming off cars and smashing in other people's windshields, flying up and over. And that was a law that went through the legislative session last year. It didn't make it out. But it's, again, I would expect to see it again this year of what can people be held responsible for clearing that ice off their car, and what type of, what would the fine be and things like that.
What about the fact that it's getting darker, or the shortening of the day? How does that affect traffic safety?
Well, pedestrians, we have seen an increase in pedestrian fatalities in Vermont over the last several years, and every county has a regional planning commission. We've seen very good success with, Brattleboro as a success story, where they have done things to have the roads, better lighting on the roadways. But again, if you know you're going to be out walking, having reflective devices, not wearing dark clothing, those are all just kind of common sense things, but sometimes we forget to do them. So if some of these regional planning commissions have handed out reflectors to people for runners and joggers or just walkers and things like that. But that's something we look at with the Highway Safety Alliance. Should we have better sidewalks in areas, and what can we do? Burlington has seen a few people hit this year on bicycles and in the downtown area, and sometimes it's not just one person's at fault. Both people sort of have a role to play in something like that happening.
One thing I noticed that, fortunately, we do have a lot of visitors, and particularly now, when the height of the foliage season. And I always look at the license plates. I always did that when I was a kid. How many license plates you could see. And what kind of efforts are being made when people come into the state, to let them know about these new laws and about our own peculiar road conditions, which some people might not be familiar with?
One of the things we're doing from our public information campaign is we're going to have permanent signs placed at the entrances to the state, so people will know about the restriction on use of cell phone while you're driving. So we'll get the message out that way. We love to have visitors come to the state, and one of the issues that we do from the Department of Motor Vehicles, as I said, we are the lead agency for commercial vehicle enforcement, and a couple of years ago we started a motor coach inspection program, in which we do is we'll go to the destination areas, and buses will come in, passengers will be dropped off, and then we'll have the bus go to another spot, and we'll have a team of inspectors go through and inspect that bus to make sure that it meets safety standards, to look at the driver's credentials to make sure he or she is a safe driver. And that's been really, really successful, and we found that the tourist areas, they like that. They want to make sure that their guests are arriving here safely, and we also send the word out to the motor coach industry. If you're going to send vehicles to Vermont, make sure the vehicle and the driver are safe.
Excellent.
Yeah, and again, coming down, if you're going to be driving, you're leaving Vermont and you're going to New York, their law of hands-free has been in effect for quite some time. New York and Connecticut's been the same. So again, a responsibility, if you know you're going out of state, is to take a few minutes to look up, see what the laws are in that state, whether the seatbelt laws and handheld laws and whatever, those are things that kind of falls back on the driver to make sure of the responsibility. If you're going to that place, you need to know what laws to be paying attention to.
That's great. I'll tell you, you guys really are very welcome guests at any time, but particularly now. You know, we're really right in the height of it's getting busy, it's getting nice, and the foliage is fantastic, and it's wonderful that we have these visitors, and people are getting busier too, and these things are going off like. I'm surprised mine didn't go off.
I was going to say, I'm glad that thing has been ringing now.
Yeah,
So.
I know. We'll have you back again sometime to discuss other issues as they may come up.
Great.
And I'd just like to give you the opportunity now, since we're at the end of the show, maybe to say something to our viewers about these matters and anything you want to tell the folks.
Well, I think that this is an adjustment phase for all of us, law enforcement included. You know, and this law, that's one question I get over and over again. Does the law apply to law enforcement and fire and EMS? And it does. We're going to be holding our members accountable just the same. They shouldn't have the phone in their hand when they're driving a vehicle. And it just really want people to think about personal responsibility. Be as safe as you can out there. This is serious business. There's a lot of lives lost every year in motor vehicle crashes that we could prevent. And it just comes down to just taking a few minutes to plan your trip, be as safe as you possibly can, and I think that if we do that, we're going to continue to see this reduction in crashes in the state.
I think Gary's absolutely right. Our message is focus on safety.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, and this is Dennis McMahon. You've been watching Positively Vermont, where our guests have been Lieutenant Garry Scott, the supervisor of the State Police Traffic Safety Unit, and Glen Button, the Director of Enforcement and Safety for the Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles. Thank you for watching. This is Dennis McMahon for Positively Vermont.